It's now time for your Election Crimes Bulletin with Greg Palast.
And Greg, it is good to have you back. I hear you might be doing some fishing in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Catch some sharks or drown trying? Or something.
That's the game. So at any rate, you heard right. Donald Trump's plan to win 2024 is literally a repeat of a plan that was created by the Ku Klux Klan in 1946. In 1946 in Georgia, the Ku Klux Klan incorporated itself as Vigilantes, Inc., which, by the way, is the new name for our film. Many of you saw Vigilante, an hour-long film about Vigilante, Georgia's vote suppression hitman. We're now making it a national film that's going to be feature-length, produced by George DiCaprio, Martin Sheen, narrated by Rosario Dawson. But this is going to be called Vigilantes, Inc., which is the name that the Ku Klux Klan gave itself, and it's part of the 2024 Trump plan. What the Klan did in 46 was incorporate so that they could run a huge operation of individually challenging black voters. And if you go to gregpalast.com, you'll see that we got through the Freedom of Information Act from the Federal Bureau of Investigation these files of the Klan going after and challenging the voting rights of black voters. In fact, here's a line that you'll see if you go to gregpalast.com. The entire list of Negro registrants challenged. That's from the FBI report. Every Negro in certain counties, in Savannah area, every single black voter was challenged. The result was that this was 1946, but what happened was that elected Eugene Talmadge, who was the chief strategist for the Klan. So that made him governor because he removed all the black voters. And he was about to be arrested. Now, here's something interesting, Dennis. The FBI was about to arrest him because, you know what? Mass challenges of black people is against this is well before the Voting Rights Act. But the FBI and Harry Truman thought that, wait a minute, this is a violation of the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. So they were about to arrest the governor of Georgia, Eugene Talmadge, but just before they arrested him, he decided to just drink himself to death, literally. Now, what do we care about 1946? Because they're using, the GOP has decided to use the same exact plan, the Vigilantes, Inc. plan from the Klan, where there's going to be these individual vigilante challengers. Now, we warned about this because that's what they start out with in Georgia. The thing is that Georgia is the test kitchen for all the GOP's vote suppression tricks. So they're going to take the vote suppression tricks that they did in Georgia of challenging individual voters. Remember they challenged 180,000 voters 2 years ago. 180,000 voters were challenged by vigilantes, including the guy who dresses up like Doc Holliday, the vigilante from the OK Corral. He has loaded 6 guns, I kid you not. He's kind of dangerous because his hands are kind of shaky, so I'm nervous around this guy. And he challenged 4,000 voters, mostly black soldiers at Fort Benning, including the guy we've had on the air, Major Gamaliel Turner, who is the Pentagon's expert on warfare of the future. He is the son of Reverend Turner, who was the co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference with Martin Luther King. So they challenged the Major's vote, the vigilante. He had to fly all the way to Georgia, 5,000 miles round trip, flew all the way to Georgia, hired big voting rights attorney Mark Elias, and got his vote counted. The other 4,000 soldiers at Fort Benning, black soldiers, lost their vote. Because how many people can afford to make that type of flight, et cetera? He just said, I don't care what it costs, I'm getting my vote. But understand how close Reverend Warnock came to, the Reverend Senator Warnock,
right.
The minister, the senator, how close he came to losing that election. And remember that these challenges began really in 2020. Biden only won Georgia, as you know, by less than 12,000 votes officially. But that's after they had challenged a whole bunch of people. If this vigilante stuff keeps up, they're not only going to lose Georgia. They're bringing this vigilante challenge system to Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Iowa. In other words, the swing states. And there's a massive attack on Texas because, remember, the Democratic Party always wrote off Georgia as redneck red. And then Stacey Abrams showed them, if you let our people vote and you get our people out, Georgia is a blue state. It has an African-American and a Jewish senator, both two of the most liberal senators in the U.S. Senate. You let people vote and it will be a blue state. Same with Texas. So I just came back from Texas where they're playing the same games, and it's pretty bad.
And what
so
is
in other words,
happening
vigilantes
exactly
instead
in
of the
Texas?
voters could pick your president.
What is happening in Texas? Because that's sort of a front line of this crap.
Yes, well, I don't think many Americans realize that Houston is the city with the largest black population in America of any city. We don't think of Texas as African American, but it is. Houston has the highest black population of any city in America, and they don't want them to vote, nor the Hispanics. Look, Texas is a minority-majority state. If people vote, it's going to be a blue state. So I met with the African-American supervisor of Houston. It's actually Harris County. He was accused of forging 700,000 ballots in the last election. 700,000 ballots. That's why Biden almost won Texas, supposedly because of 700,000 forged ballots. I did note that if he worked 24 hours a day, nonstop, it would take him about 121 years to forge 700,000 ballots. But here's the problem. This is a guy, Rodney Ellis, Supervisor Ellis. He was telling me that after the 2020 election, because he was accused of forging these ballots, because it's an open carry state, Texas, there were guys with armed automatic weapons marching around outside his house. And then there was a guy who was repairing air conditioning in one of his neighbors, and they followed him and his air conditioning truck and ran him off the road. One of these right-wing vigilantes put a gun to the driver's head, a Mexican-American, put a gun to the guy's head and said, "You got 700,000 stolen ballots, turn them over." Luckily, the cops, Houston cops, saw this, that there was a gun at some guy's head, so they ran out and said, "What's going on here?" And the guy with the gun, who had ran this poor air conditioning guy off the road, he was a Houston cop, retired Houston cop, and he showed his Houston cop badge. But then he said, this guy has stolen ballots in the back of his truck. So they opened up the back of the truck and in the air conditioning truck, and there was just air conditioning pipes and duct tape and stuff.
Amazing.
That was it.
Greg, let's talk about, you've always been first on identifying the big money that's behind these schemes. And now we're seeing revelations. You know where I'm going. It's coming. The corporate folks who own these elections now, who you've been reporting about, have now been exposed in their ability to seize control through essentially buying them off of the Supreme Court, which is the other part of this election scamming that you've been identifying for decades.
Yes. Well, first of all, like a lot of the money for this vigilante operation is coming from the Bradley Foundation out of Milwaukee. They were the guys that owned the Allen Bradley factories in Milwaukee. The family shut all their factories down, sold them the Raytheon that moved them to China, and have used the money to go after black voters. But the other thing is, you're talking about the Supreme Court. 5 of the 9 members of the Supreme Court, 5 of the 9 came out of the Federalist Society. That was the judicial organization created by Charlie Koch, David Koch, and a couple of their billionaire cronies. So you have a majority of the court literally came out of the Koch oil bullpen. The important thing also with the Federalist Society is that they are creating a whole set of judges at many levels of these courtrooms. In fact, one of the problems that some of these vigilante challenges have been approved by the courts. So we can't just think of the Supreme Court. Now, we also know, for example, Harlan Crow, who is pleasuring Justice Thomas. But it's not just Harlan Crow. who was paying off Thomas. But we have that picture of Charlie Koch with Clarence Thomas, who was at a Bohemian Grove do with Charlie Koch and didn't put it down. In other words, if you're getting emoluments, a judge has to declare them. But interestingly, the Supreme Court, there are no rules for Supreme Court justices. If you were another judge, he would have been barred from even going and accepting that Bohemian Grove upscale vacation. Very interesting, by the way, is that, of course, standing between Charlie Koch and Clarence Thomas, when they were caught candidly at Bohemian Grove, standing between them was Ken Burns of PBS. David Koch gave Burns $5 million. So you're wondering why these stories aren't on public TV?
Yeah.
Yeah. Checkbook
right,
journalism.
Listen.
Yeah.
You're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. This is the Election Crimes Bulletin. This is what we've been doing with Greg Palast for about 20 years, in which we're trying to track. And this isn't about Democrats and Republicans, because I'm neither of them. This is about the right to vote that people died fighting for. Black people died. They are still fighting for this right to vote. And Greg has been really on the front line for many years in trying to defend the vote. Now, we know, Greg, I'm sort of circling into the new documentary, which is called Long Knife, the Osage Coke Oil, and the New Killers.
Right, we have a second
of the Flower
documentary,
Moon.
right.
And I just want to put this context that in recent years, the indigenous movements in North America, Native Americans, have been fighting and organizing. For a long time, they didn't bother to organize because they didn't have hope. But there's been a fight for them to take back the vote. So their vote has become very powerful, besides the resources that is theirs, except for genocide.
Well, I got to tell you that the tribal vote is extremely important in America because it's concentrated in swing states like Nevada, Arizona, even Georgia has a large American Native population. So these swing states like Colorado, et cetera. So the point is that if they can knock off these swing voters, and again, I'm not partisan. I'm with you. I'm not here for the Democrats or Republicans. But the truth is, it's Republicans 100% of the challenges. The 80 challengers who challenged 180,000 people in Georgia, the hundreds that are challenging people in Arizona right now, every single one is a GOP operative. So I'm not being partisan when I say it's the Republicans that are doing this. And they are going after the tribal vote because that is the most solid Democratic vote in America. You have actually a higher percentage of American natives that vote Democratic than African Americans do even. It's solid. And so the GOP knows if they make it hell to vote on, for example, on reservations. Like in Arizona, are you ready for this one? You'll love this one, Dennis. At the Yaqui-Pascua Reservation, the Republican legislature of Arizona removed all the polling stations. I mean, they removed every single polling station from the res, which means some people have to drive like 50 miles round trip or more if they want to go to a polling station. And the only reason Arizona ended up in Biden's column by like 12,000 votes, something like that, 14,000 votes, is because the American Native activists went into that reservation, other reservations, and said, here, they don't want us to vote, so we're just going to have to vote by mail and show people how to get their mail ballot counted, which is not always easy. And to stop them from using drop boxes, you have armed vigilantes who are standing next to the drop boxes, and when people go up to ask them to try to drop in their ballot, if they're Hispanic, they say, where's your proof of citizenship? Which is against the law, and also obviously having a weapon while you're standing over a drop box is. So there are organizations that have put together flying squads of de-escalators, not armed vigilantes to meet. We don't want some shootouts at the drop boxes, but this is what's happening. They're literally standing around the drop box with guns, scaring off Hispanic voters. They're removing the polling stations from the reservations, and then on top of it, they're doing these vigilante challenges, which are going to be huge in Arizona. Again, it's not the government. These are self-proclaimed vigilantes who are using the same method that the Ku Klux Klan did, which is that they are individually challenging voters. But when I say individually, and we've talked about one woman in Georgia, one GOP operative who works for Marjorie Taylor Greene, she challenged 32,000 voters. 32,000 voters, one person.
And she
just
didn't
put
know any
all
of
the
them.
names on a thumb drive. They get these names from these right-wing organizations. So this is the danger. This is how this election can be flipped. If the public wants to vote for Donald Trump, hey, that's democracy. But if it's the vigilantes, not the voters, who choose our president, then it's not a democracy.
Right. And we have seen now how Trump works. If he wins, he wins. And if he loses, he wins, one way or the other. And these schemes, these voter fraud accusation schemes, are going to be at the heart of the matter. And we can guess with artificial intelligence, and Biden's going to be showing up everywhere, saying what? I don't know.
Yeah, well, one of the problems is, again, the cover for all these vigilante voter challenges, et cetera, supposedly black people and Hispanics and American natives commit voter fraud unless you clamp down on them. They're going to stuff those ballot boxes. Now, one thing I should note is that the major propaganda piece, which is selling this idea of massive vote fraud and you ought to sign up to be a vigilante to challenge voters, that is the organization True the Vote, which came up with that film 2,000 Mules, literally calling black men mules who were supposedly paid $10 each to stuff ballot boxes. Well, they just got sued by one of their supposed mules because they blanked out some faces, but some people were able to recognize. And one guy recognized himself, and they said, oh, here's a mule. It's O.J. Simpson getting away with a crime. The guy's a high-tech executive in Atlanta, and he was bringing his family's ballots to the drop box. In Georgia, like in most states, you can put in your families. If you live with people, you can put in their ballots at the drop box. So he's suing them. So Salem Media issued an apology, said it's going to stop distributing 2,000 mules. But several million people have already seen it.
Say a few things about that, what that film implies.
Okay, so that film says what they did was every voting drop box in America has a camera on it. They'll see who's putting in the ballots. So you can't stuff the ballot box, or you can't be an illegal voter. Remember that every mail-in ballot, while the ballot itself is secret, the envelope is not. Every single envelope on a mail-in ballot has a special barcode which identifies it to one single voter. So you can't photocopy this stuff and start stuffing ballot boxes. People have this crazy idea that you can just make up ballots and stick them in. No, because they take the barcode and they match it against the registration of every single voter. They counted the ballots 5 times in Georgia. It was ridiculous. So what they did was they have this picture of this guy putting ballots in a drop box in Atlanta, and they called him a mule. So he's now sued them, and Salem's now withdrawn the film from distribution. But it's still all over the place, and it's still being promoted even today by
referenced and
Donald Trump.
Absolutely, it's out there.
Yeah, so it's the damage is done, and also while they apologize to this one voter, they have not withdrawn their charge that Stacey Abrams and George Soros were paying black men $10 a ballot to stuff in illegal ballots. Though you wonder why they would bother giving someone $10 to drop off an illegal ballot when for 58 cents you can just stick a stamp on it and stick it in the mailbox. But that's besides that's using reason. Anyway, it's completely phony. They have not found not one single illegal ballot in those drop boxes out of about 78,000 that were cast in Georgia. But they're using this. Basically, they've virtually eliminated drop boxes in Georgia. They're eliminating them all over the country. And that was the only way that Joe Biden won, was through drop box and mail-in voting because of COVID. We had 180 million votes. That's way beyond anything we've ever seen in America, 180 million votes, because places like Georgia, California, mailed out ballots to people so they wouldn't have to wait in long lines. So you had a massive, massive turnout. So now the laws are being changed to reverse those systems of making it easier to vote. And for example, in Texas, I told you about Rodney Ellis, who was accused of forging 700,000 ballots. Well, they've tried to eliminate drop boxes. They eliminated drop boxes in Texas. So you know what he did? He had 24/7 manned kiosks in Houston where you could still go. Instead of a drop box, there'd actually be someone right there to take your ballot, look at your ID. And Ken Paxton, the Republican Attorney General of Texas, who, by the way, is facing criminal indictment now, but that's a different matter. Anyway, the Attorney General of Texas, the Republican, said that he actually said Donald Trump would have lost Texas if I hadn't stopped Houston from sending out 2.4 million ballots to its residents. If those ballots had been mailed out, Trump would have lost Texas. So, this is a war out there, and and the media is looking at things like, whether Trump's going to be affected by his convictions for fooling around with hookers or whatever.
He's going to be affected. He's going to raise much more money. It's definitely going to carry him to.
And the media is lazy. It's easy to cover a court trial. It's very hard to cover this sneaky vigilante business.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, and we just have a minute left, and I want you. We sort of left an open end of that. We were all very hopeful about that DA investigation into Trump, but it seems like the right wing has trumped Trump on that. You always said that, don't get so excited about if you could just find me a few votes, quote, because that wasn't going to hold it.
No, I mean, they had what's going to convict them in Georgia is that they signed up false electors who never ran, and I don't see how they get out of that crime. How Rudy Giuliani doesn't spend time in an orange suit on that one with some of the other characters. Whether Trump himself will end up in the Hooskow, I don't know. The big problem is, of course, as we know, Fani Willis, as we mentioned, was a disaster. She hired her boyfriend to run the case. It created conflicts of interest, and now it looks like the case will not go to trial before the election. That's a shame because that's a very, very serious charge, and it was a very, very well-developed racketeering case. And then Fani Willis decided to get her love life entangled in the case. That's a crime too. So I wanted to mention, by the way, that Greg Palast will be making an appearance in the Bay Area a week from Wednesday. I will be actually it'll be a poetry night.
Poetry
with me
poetry.
and well, it's El Martillo, the hammer.
Say that again?
I'm known as El Mar in the. When I've put aside my typewriter, I'm El Martillo, the hammer. And I'll be reading my poem, "I Shot the Donald," and hopefully won't get busted. But anyway, that'll be the Sunny Cove Gallery. Yeah. Sunny Cove Gallery on North Beach, 7 p.m. a week from Wednesday. I'm sure I'll be on next week with Election Crimes Bulletin beforehand. And so I hope to see you in North Beach at the Sunny Cove Gallery. 7 p.m.
Well, you can see Greg here at the Election Crimes Bulletin for the last 20 years. If you want to go check the archives, you can check him
and
out
GregPalast.com.
GregPalast.com, yes. And that's it. You're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. Thank you, Greg.